Canada expects to hit the NATO defense spending target in 2032. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the country expects to spend at least 2% of its GDP on defense in 8 years. He's been under pressure from allies at this week's NATO Leaders Summit in Washington to come up with a plan showing how Canada will reach the goal. Canada's current spending is at around 1.37%, which is set to rise to 1.76% by the end of the decade. Earlier, I sat down with Dr. Balkan Devlen from the Macdonald Laurier Institute to discuss Canada's struggles with hitting the 2% target. Now, why has it been so difficult for Canada to meet its NATO obligation for so long?
Well, I mean, there are two things. One is, as Speaker Johnson pointed out, Canada is located in a geographically in a very safe and secure place. Three oceans and world's superpower right below, which is a very friendly ally to Canada. So there is no sense of urgency within Canada, particularly after the Cold War. It is important to remember, though, that throughout the 20th century, Canada did step up and spend blood and treasure to defend its interests and its allies, both in the First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War, etc. So it is not true that Canada have never done this. But it is important to note that, especially after the end of Cold War, the sense of safety and security that is afforded to Canada because of our geographic location means that our political elites are not feeling any sense of urgency and are complacent as the world changes. Unfortunately, we're not in 1990s anymore. The world is a much more dangerous place. Our allies and partners are expecting to Canada to meet its obligations and do what it promises to do, and we are falling short of that.
And what do you make of the 2% benchmark? Why is 2% the figure that is picked, and is that appropriate?
I think it is not particularly useful to focus on whether 2% is an arbitrary number or not. There are important components to it, including capabilities, where you spend the money. If you spend most of your money on, say, pensions, for example, that's not going to help defend your interests and security as well as your allies. What really matters is what you spend on, how you spend on it. But it is also important to note that allies come together in 2014 in the Wales summit and agreed that this should be the target, and Canada signed up for that. I think it's a red herring to complain that 2% is an arbitrary number. It might very well be an arbitrary number, but all our allies are either trying to get there or announced plans to get there. 23 of the 32 is going to be over 2%. The rest announced plans. Canada is the only NATO ally out of the 32 that does not have a plan to get to 2%, and that is just not acceptable.
Now, you briefly touched on this, but what do you make of the argument that Canada doesn't need to spend that much on defense because we are a country that doesn't face threats from our neighbors?
Um, that is the myth in a way, or the perception, and that might have been true right after the end of Cold War with what is called the peace dividend. The Soviet threat disappeared. Everyone would like to spend money on other things of social services, healthcare, etc., etc. And Canada, being located in a geographically insulated, relatively place, thought that we could get away with it. But it is also important to note that the world is not what it used to be. Canada, our security and prosperity heavily relies on a well-functioning international system in which, as a trading nation, we benefit significantly, and that's one of the reasons why Canada is in these organizations, including NATO, to maintain that system that we benefited for our security and prosperity, and we contributed throughout the Cold War significantly. So the sense that this is right after the post-Cold War era, the United States is the only superpower, that is gone. We are facing Russia and China, two major threats, and other smaller threats such as North Korea and Iran, that tries to undermine and disrupt this international order, poses threats to Canada as well. Remember that Russia is is our neighbor to the north. Arctic is going to be an important area for geopolitical competition. It is home to us. We're not insulated from these challenges to us and to our allies and partners. So we need to get out of that mythologic idea that we will be safe from threats elsewhere, and recognize the world is a different one, and we need to do our part.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're always welcome.
Coming up, we'll have our U.S. election tracker update with our contributor, Wyatt Sharp. So stay with us.